Okay. Okay, so we are live. Okay, so hello everyone. Everybody's going to be able to join afterwards as well. Yeah, I'm going to just introduce very fast the event series we're doing because of you who is the first time joining. So NeuroTechDesign is an open-ended online event series by NeuroTechX, hosted by NeuroTechBCN. What we're gonna be doing is hosting guests and expertise work at the intersection of neuroscience, neurotechnology, design, and so on. We've been starting last week hosting Dr. Mariam, and then today we have Ann, whose work has been amazing. I have her book right here. The one she just showed, she's going to show her new version of the book as well. I mean, doesn't need a long introduction. I just need to say that her work has been really influential in this circle of biometrics, perception, understanding the impact of buildings on people and how we behave within built environments. She's going to be presenting today her work on all of that. And most interestingly for me, her very controversial yet interesting take on modernist architecture and the modernist discourse. So the floor is yours, Anne.
Oh, listen, thank you for doing this. We're living in amazing times. We just had an amazing election in the United States. I'm talking from Concord, Massachusetts. And I really believe we have to really bring the world together, and that science can help us bring the world together. And so that's why I'm so excited to be speaking with you today. It's actually Thanksgiving, it's a holiday. I'm in a building all alone. It's kind of amazing, but it's kind of remarkable. I want to bring the world together, and we have to do this, and America needs to lead again like we used to. So on that note, let's just begin, and please,
sure.
Welcome to questions, and I'll just start, okay?
Before you start, you can all be pasting any question in the chat as we go. I'm going to be asking these to Anne once she's done, and then Anne, you can share your screen.
Yeah, and please, Firas, if anything goes over anything, just please tell me what I need to do.
Sure.
Okay, so let's just be. This is very casual conversation, but I'll just go through some of the science and some of the amazing tools we have today to show how humans actually function. So this talk is called Architecture in the 21st Century Paradigm Shift. It's sponsored by me and a new nonprofit we just founded called the Human Architecture and Planning Institute. I'll tell you a little bit about that later. And what this talk really is about is that we're in a new century, and it's amazing. And it's a new century that the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development out of Paris, actually renamed in 2012. They renamed it the Age of Biology. The century I was born in was the age of chemistry and physics. My dad was a chemical engineer, makes sense to me. The 19th century was the age of engineering, and the age of engineering created things like the Eiffel Tower in Paris. I just stole, this PowerPoint is online. It's by Professor Anne Glover. She's a UK professor. She's a dame of the British Empire. It's kind of fun. And this PowerPoint's online about this new century we're in, and I think it's fantastic. So I told the OECD I'm going to be using some of it, and they said, that's fine. And what she's really saying is in the 19th century, our world shifted because of engineering. You know, we got the first big buildings made of steel and iron. We got bicycles, we got trains, we got cameras. That really changed lives amazingly. It really changed architecture. And then in the 20th century, it was the age of chemistry and physics. If I tell my kids, that one time there were no plastics, they won't believe me. Our life is full of plastics. Just like if I tell them at one time there weren't computers, they won't believe me either because they grew up with the internet. But the 20th century had amazing changes because of insights in chemistry and physics. And now we're in this completely new age, according to the OECD, and I believe them. We're the age of biology, where we can totally understand kind of how cells work, how nature works from inside out, okay? If you're asked, do you recognize what's on the lower left in this picture? Can you tell me what it is?
Oh, sorry, I'm muted. Yeah, of course. These are some neurons, right?
Neurons, that's right. Now, how many neurons in your male brain?
8 billion?
What?
80 billion. 80 billion?
Yeah, something like 86 billion. 86 billion, that's right. That's good, very good. Most people don't know that. And because this—
Yeah, neurotechers do. Actually, we have some neuroscientists here as well.
Yeah, we have a lot of neurons and about 1 trillion connections, and that's really amazing. And we can start understanding that better. And what a paradigm shift does is it makes it possible to do things that you could never even think of before. So Oscar Pistorius could, in 2012, he didn't have legs, but he was able to get entry into the Olympics. That was before he was convicted of murdering his girlfriend. But anyway, and to make a point is paradigm shifts really shift things. It shifts how you understand the world around you. And in architecture, the shift is going to be phenomenal. So in architecture, what you can start to do is you can use eye tracking, which follows your subliminal eye movements to actually look at how people take in buildings. I found this actually fascinating. We know what this building is. This is the Villa Rotonda, a very famous building, hugely important in architectural history. It influenced the design of the White House. And the design of the White House, the elevation that looks like Villa Rotonda is on every $20 bill. So as an American, I never could understand why a building that was built for a retiring Italian cleric, 400 years ago, why would that be on every $20 bill? It makes no sense. So what happens? So when you eye track it, you start to see how people look at it. The yellow dots are called fixations. That's actually where your eye is really taking in the visual information, and the lines between them are called saccades. And the more ancient part of your brain, the brainstem, is really directing where your eyes are going to be looking. And what the tech people do is they do very amazing analysis. They'll have 30 to 39 people look at each image, and then they'll do an analysis to find the TTFF, the time to first fixation. So we can see that the fourth image here, the statue here, people look at on average within 4.9 seconds. And we can tell that 30 of 32 people looked at this image in 4.9 seconds. I mean, this is really important. This is why when you go to business school at schools in the United States, you will use this technology to determine if your package you've designed is appropriate. Will it get seen in the department store? And so they also use this in advertising. They use this to design websites. It's very, very, very powerful technology because it deconstructs how human vision works. And this is a setup we had when we use this technology. We're using technology in this case by an international firm called iMotions. They're based out of Boston and Copenhagen. They're also, I believe, in other European cities. And what you just saw was eye tracking. But there are lots of other things that the big companies follow to really understand the human experience. And that includes things like facial expression analysis. They analyze the muscles on your face to see if you're smiling or frowning, how you're feeling, your heart rate, your galvanic skin, how the electrical charges shift, and your brain waves to determine if you want to approach or avoid something. I mean, it gets quite complicated pretty quickly. So that's why we have to kind of take it apart so we can understand it. It's also really important, if you want to do this research, to use the best technology that's out there. And because the car companies are so powerful in our culture, they use the best technology. So this technology is used by Honda, BMW, and GM. So that's where you want to go. You want to go where you want to follow the technology the most powerful people are using. But the fact is, this setting up a lab can be a little bit expensive, but there also are very, very low cost algorithmic technologies you can use. This one's from 3M, visual attention software, and it only costs $50 a month. What you do is you just upload any image to a cloud platform, and it will come back within a minute how people are predicted to look at it in the first 3 to 5 seconds without their conscious awareness. So when I put in my favorite building, Villa Rotonda, you can see in the first 3 to 5 seconds where people look on the building, how they look around the building. And also you get a sense, my gosh, it looks a little bit like a face. And that maybe what people are seeing in it subliminally is a face. And because we're a social species, that is actually why it became such powerful. That's one of the reasons it became so iconic in architectural history and would end up on every $20 bill. So again, it's a paradigm shift in totally reframing, like paradigm shifts do, how we understand architecture. And so the whole point of this talk is that if you're going to do it, be 21st century designer, if you're going to talk about architecture in the 21st century, if you're going to understand the human experience, you want to do community planning, you need to understand that in the 21st century, we design for the unconscious, just like the car companies do. They're designing for your unconscious brain. Of course, they're also designing for the conscious brain, but they're really designing certainly their ads and a lot of the aspects of the car for the unconscious brain. There's a famous quote from Freud, the world-renowned psychologist. The mind is like an iceberg. It floats with 1/7 of its bulk above water. It's the idea that Freud was saying is people, I mean, he interviewed hundreds of people and he realized people didn't understand themselves because they didn't understand how it was their unconscious that was directing their lives, okay? And now neuroscientists say, yep, Freud was right. Well, Freud was more or less right. Now it's actually 95% or less than 5% of brain activity. It's all unconscious awareness. All of our conscious thoughts and actions are unconscious first. As Eric Kandel, he's a Nobel Prize winning neuroscientist in his 80s now, he explains very well in his book called The Age of Insight. So all designers today in every field, I'd say with the exception of architecture, are designing for your unconscious brain and they're measuring the impact of your unconscious brain to determine your designs. There's also something called information theory that's used to understand the brain and the nervous system, and this also impacts how people do design. It's really, really pretty interesting. It's this idea that 11 million bits of information are going into your brain every second. A bit is a unit of information. This is when you're awake. 10 million are visual, 1 million is touch. The human body sends 11 million bits per second to the brain for processing, but the conscious mind can only handle 50 bits per second. Again, this information processing data underscores why the top companies in the world, including Apple and all the car companies, are designing for the unconscious brain. So how will age biology and understanding the unconscious reframe architecture and how we see ourselves? Well, you can do a little more of these studies. I'll just show you one or two more here. This we did for the city of New York, where we took a New York City library, which had recently been renovated, and we eye tracked it. And we showed that without conscious awareness, how people look. We didn't tell them what to do. This is what their brain made them do. And then what we did is we had another different, so 30 people looked at that image. And then what we did is we had a different set of 30 people look at this image, where we photoshopped out, we didn't tell them this, we photoshopped out the windows. And what becomes instantly apparent, which is quite interesting, is how people look at the building very differently. And then when you ask them, where would you rather wait or have your 4-year-old wait while you go park the car and she stands with the books? Which building do you think, Firaz, people say they want to wait in front of or have a child wait in front of? Which building? The building on the left or the right?
Everybody's saying right.
It's exactly right. I've asked this to 1,000 people. Everybody wants to stand by the right, but they don't know why. But because I've done a biometric analysis, I can infer that subliminally, the ability to attach more makes them feel subliminally more secure. And then what you can do, what's fascinating too, is you can also determine, will people want to hang out in front of this building? It's absolutely, for me as an architect, this was quite fascinating. So what you can see is that when you remove when you remove the windows, people find the door in less than 1 second, which is quite interesting. But by 12 seconds, they're already looking beyond the building. As you can see, where the number 2 is on the left, they're already looking beyond the building by 12 seconds. Whereas in the building, when it has windows, what happens is it takes them a fraction of a second longer to find the door, 1.2 seconds. But by 4 seconds, 10.8 seconds, they're looking beyond the building. And then they move back to look at the building again within by 12 seconds. They're back focusing on the building again. So it's very interesting. The building on the left, if you designed it, people would tend to pass it. The building on the right, if you designed it that way, because of the subliminal impact, they tend to want to linger in front of it. And if they were going to hold a holiday party or design a New Year's card, they'd probably want to use the picture of the building on the right for the New Year's card. They'd never even think of using the picture on the left. Okay, so it's really fascinating when you start to get into what the subliminal brain does for you and how Freud was really right. It's directing your experience of everything. And so here's two images. This is in near Cambridge, not far from Harvard and Tufts University. And so the building on the left is what actually exists, what was actually built by the city as a parking lot. And on the right, we added some art, some Matisse-like art. And when we ask people where they want to stand, they want to all stand in front of the building on the right. And what's so interesting is they actually, your brain makes you look, when it doesn't have the art, the brain makes you look down the street. It's very interesting. The red dots here are heat maps, which aggregate where your brain is making you look. All right. And then what gets even more fascinating is you can actually then apply facial expression analysis, and you can see how many times people will subliminally smile, or they'll raise their eyebrows go up and their lips go up when they look at the building like this. You see, we had only about 10 people look at this, and only at one point did 4 of them smile. But look at the difference. This is quite fascinating, that when you add the art, the subliminal experience, that people will subliminally smile to themselves more, even maybe without even realizing it, by adding the art. And because smiling releases oxytocin, it's a hugging hormone, it makes you feel good, you're going to actually change their biochemistry by adding this art. It's pretty amazing. Now, enjoy looking at this. You'll never see it again, because since I've used this, Apple took this software, bought it, and took it off the market. Which I think is fantastic. But there's other facial expression analysis you can see, but specifically not this one. Any questions, Firas? Okay.
I'm just pasting them there. So we can do the questions in the end.
Okay.
But everybody wants more street art. That's what I see.
Everybody wants more street art. It's exactly. More street art is why we need it. It makes people happy. It makes people feel connected. Okay. So we can start really looking really at how people ignore blankness, how buildings make people feel. And so you can look at, this is a new building, relatively new, built again in New York. And this is how it actually looks. It's a public building. And then you can see that the way it's designed, they didn't understand how people work. So the way it's designed, people are going to look at the fire hydrant, they'll look at the central part, maybe where the cars are, and they're going to look at the building beyond. But I asked a student at the Harvard GSD to just put in some windows, and someone said to me, they're not very well designed, Ann. And it turns out it doesn't even matter, because even with the windows, your brain won't let you look at the building that's the high-rise residential tower as much. It's really amazing, the impact on the design. You're going to start subliminally, you'll start thinking about the building in front of you more, which you want to do because it's a public facility. You want people to think about it, okay? So you can also start asking really basic questions. So this is another New York City building, a library, another public facility. Where do you think, Firas, I'm going to ask you this question. Where do you think people are going to look? This is a public building built about 10 years ago. Where do you think people are going to look?
At the people. Yes.
There you go. They completely ignore the building. And what's really interesting is they really like the yoga girl.
Yeah, somebody's saying the ads. Yeah.
It's really fantastic. So even though the building is huge, and people are often confused by this because it has all the reflections, you think the brain would want you to look at that. Nope, the brain doesn't want you to look at that. It doesn't want you to look at that. And then you can get into details here about how they do look at the Queen's Library, because I think that in the picture, the bus is there with a very contrasting roof. But what's really interesting for traffic engineers too, it's not till 14 seconds that they see the red light. There's too much else going on. And that girl, oh my gosh, 30 of like 34 people immediately looked at her. They couldn't help it. And they tended to go back and look at her in the 15-second interval 4 times. She was just too much, right? And then this is a famous iconic place in Boston. And this is the Hancock Tower in Trinity Church, Copley Square. Where do you think people look? What happens is people actually ignore the tower, but except for an art installation that was put on it in 2015, which had a picture of a man floating down a barge. They looked at the art installation, they looked at Trinity Church, but they mostly ignore the tower, because people, as Firas said, are built to look at people. And here, this is what I ask people. I went through slides very quickly there. Does anyone remember what they saw on the previous slide?
I saw a mug with a red face.
There you go. You got it. Good
Some
job.
people are saying woman. Yeah, it's a woman mug.
And woman, and you see the woman. So what happens is the brain is so hardwired to see people. There's the mug. So, and you couldn't read the, you could not read the letters on the mug because it takes 50,000 times longer for your brain to process letters than to process an image, particularly a face. And so this design idea drives all Apple advertising. So Apple advertising tends to feature a person doing something and almost no text because they want to get your attention. So when you really start looking at how much our brain is prioritized for faces, it's good to look at this art. This is Renaissance art. Archimboldo. So most people, when they see this, they don't see the face. They just see a basket of fruit. But then when they see this, they see it's a face. And the reason is because your brain is hardwired to see a face right side up. Okay, and so this is really the most important thing architects and designers need to know. We're face-architects before we're architects. And the book I read, The Age of Insight by Eric Kandel, who's a former Columbia professor and Nobel Prize winner, he loves art. And he uses this book to explain why art works, the neuroscience of art. And then he applies it in the book itself. So this is a book about neuroscience, really, but he puts a very attractive female face on it because he knows subliminally that's what people are hardwired to look for first. Okay, so he's walking the talk of neuroscience. This is from Kandel. So template matching approach, because turns out the face pattern is in our brain before birth. The fetus in third trimester can recognize upright faces. They've done studies projecting through the uterine wall an image of an upright face, and the fetus responds to it. It cannot respond to the upside down face. So we're hardwired already. We have to see one important thing, and it's the face, upright. And so the tech people all know this, and they design around it. There's a smile in the Amazon logo. The Amazon, they track what people click on when they're buying books. The number one thing people click on is a face on a book cover, a human. The number two thing is the face of a pet. And then after I wrote my first book, we eye tracked it. I told the publisher to put a face on it. They did. And that's where people looked first. Okay, so car companies know this, and they design specifically for it. And I don't know, in the United States now you can buy car lashes for your car. A Midwestern couple came up with a company where you can buy eyeliners and lashes for your car. And people do this. It's a very successful company. Okay, and then cars have expressions, and the car companies all know this, and the expressions in the United States have gotten angrier, in part because I think there's more congestion, more concern, more traffic. And so this is a Wall Street Journal article back in 2006 talking about how people buy for car expressions, right? And then this is from a computer scientist. This picture was in a computer science magazine, a guy doing robots, designing robots, talking about how people really look for faces in building facades. This is a quote from his article in the Journal of Computer Information Systems. The perception of faces more critical than previously thought for how humans perceive the aesthetics of the environment. So basically, people designing robots need to know how humans function, or they can't design robots well for them. So they have to have the robots mimic the way we behave, and we're always looking for and at face-like building facades. Okay. And so when you understand this, it kind of totally, like any paradigm shift, it totally transforms your understanding of architectural history. So this is on Salamanca, Spain, a World Heritage Site. And here we have the 12 apostles, and it makes sense. The church was the power in the Middle Ages. They wanted people to connect. They knew that if they put statues of the apostles looking at the people would feel the church was theirs. Makes a lot of sense. Plus, in the Middle Ages, people were illiterate. They couldn't read, right? So it makes total sense that they would come here, this would be their church. And then when you walk into an Apple store, the 12 apostles of Apple. Now, this is in the United States, and the literacy rate is over 90%, but they're using the exact same design strategy as the Catholic Church in the Middle Ages. I think that's pretty funny. And then this is the Apple Store 5 years later, exactly the same. Exactly the same. Different iPhone, bigger iPhone, exact same design strategy. Because oxytocin, the hugging hormone, the walking forward hormone is increased with direct gaze. So people will more likely enter the store if they see people looking at them there. That's what they've done. Apple hires PhD neuroscientists, and they're the one that drive the design. And this is also something very, very interesting, the work of Stephen Porges. He's founding a new polyvagal institute. And this is all about how mammals co-regulate by face-to-face interaction. So we need to see each other because we're a social species. One of the limitations of being a social species is we actually cannot regulate our own nervous system without another person there. And that's what Apple knows. And that's what Stephen Porges knows. Okay. So basically, architecture that works is a reflection of our internal brain architecture. So then the question that I had after doing some biometric studies and noticing that modern architecture is very hard for people to look at, what happened? And so I'll only talk for 10 more minutes, but I'll just quickly go through what happened. How did modern architecture happen? How did buildings become blank and faceless? So the first, 5,000 years or so of architectural history, it always looks very face-like. It's very easy to connect to. And when you do a biometric analysis, this is with 3M VAS, you can see that people are implicitly, without conscious awareness, regardless of their age, education, sex, language, they're going to look at the eyes, they're going to look at the windows, and they're going to look at the door. They're going to just implicitly attach to this building. Whereas the building on the right is a New York City library in Queens. They can't. What happened? See, to answer that question, you have to say, who are the fathers of modern architecture? This is what I give my students. So you have to fill in the blank. Can you do that, Shiraz?
That's easy though.
Okay, go on, do it.
Yeah, Mies, Gropius, Corbu.
Right, Mies van der Rohe, Walter Gropius,
yeah.
Le Corbusier. Okay, so there you go. And so what's fascinating about them when you start looking at it, they're all born about the same year and they all die about the same year. Really, really interesting, right? And when they're in their mid-20s or late or early 30s, something catastrophic happens, the first industrialized warfare, right? And that's fantastic. And in the United States, I think that's starting to get looked at more because in 2018, we had the centenary of the war. And so our public broadcasting did actually some amazing documentaries about it. And we're starting to talk about the war in a way that never was talked about in my childhood. Okay. And so what also happened, which is amazing too, is the British paid for this painting by John Singer Sargent, which depicts American and British war soldiers fighting together during a gas attack on the Western Front in like 1917. They paid for him when he was 62 years old to go to the front and sketch soldiers to record the experience. And then he finished this painting in 1919. And then in 2018, the British government had this painting go all around the country. It's absolutely amazing. Gas attack. John Singer Sargent was an amazing artist. He was from Boston, but he really lived in London most of the time. Okay, and this is the first tanks, his watercolor of tanks. Tanks were invented really in World War I. It's quite amazing, so amazing. So what happened? What's one of the World War I outcomes that we're really understanding more today that we simply didn't know when people were living through World War I? And one thing we understand now better is that more than 20% of the soldiers suffered from PTSD. This comes partly from the work of Jay Winter, a professor emeritus of history at Yale. And what happens with PTSD is it completely changes your brain architecture and the brain shrinks. And what you can now do, only since the 1990s, you can do magnetic resonance imaging. You can actually see how the brain is rewired, changes after post-traumatic stress disorder, which is kind of amazing. So PTSD rewires the brain. During a trauma, your body responds, goes into fight or flight, and it causes your brain to get stuck there. Okay, and it causes fragmentation. You can't attach to yourself as much or other people. And so what you realize when you start studying PTSD, you start realizing the fathers of modern architecture, particularly the German ones, Gropius and Mies, they had PTSD because you can see it expressed in their architecture. So what's amazing is when you look at Gropius's house. So Gropius built this house in 1930s when he was awarded a job at Harvard Graduate School of Design. And he built this house, which looks very strangely similar to a World War I bunker, like he might have seen on the Western Front. It's kind of amazing. It's got the same kind of random, arrangement and slit windows. Very, very strange. How did that happen? Well, when you study PTSD, you learn that PTSD, because it gets basically stuck in the right hemisphere, the non-vertebral hemisphere, it continually replays the trauma trying to recover for it. I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. But anyway, with PTSD, you become disembodied, as does your architecture. So the house directly across from Gropius's looks like the one on the left, a traditional farmhouse. And you could really easily find the front door. The house on the right is Gropius, of course. And where's the front door? And in fact, when you go visit this house, it's now owned by a nonprofit in Massachusetts. When you go visit, they tell a story that after it was built, a woman drove up and wanted to know where the gas pump was. She assumed it was a gas station because it didn't look like a house. And the other thing about PTSD that's so fascinating, and a lot of research has been done about this more recently, is that vision blurs and you actually lose the ability to process sensory input because of the brain degradation. So what's so interesting about architectural history is traditionally there's always so much detail in architecture and architecture buildings too. I keep thinking about the Taj Mahal. I saw that building when I was 16. And what's amazing about the building, as you approach it, your eye is delighted by more and more beautiful detail in the building facade. PTSD, you don't have the ability to process detail, so you can't put it in a building. And one reason modern architecture became so blank. Okay. The other thing about PTSD, you really see it stopping time. So Gropius made his study in his house 20 miles west of Boston. He made it the exact same section as a World War I trench. So when you're in this office on the ground floor, you cannot see out unless you stand up. It's astonishing. Even though he's in a very rural part of Massachusetts, he was on the edge of an apple orchard. And the road in front of him was a country road with maybe 5 cars going down on it. Why would you do that? Well, because he's still at the front. His brain subliminally is still at the front. And when you really see it too, which is mind-blowing, is the bedroom he designed for his wife, for him and his wife. And it's exactly laid out like a World War I dugout. The dugouts were the places men slept within the trench wall. It'd be separated from a corridor. So in his bedroom, he actually creates a corridor and then a very strong doorway with just the bed on the other side, exactly like the dugout. And when I've showed this to actually a lot of trauma therapists, including one who teaches at Harvard Medical School, and he said, yes, this is PTSD. In fact, when I showed him, I also presented him an article I wrote about it, and he posted that on his Facebook page, which is pretty funny. What about Le Corbusier? Le Corbusier, we now know he did stuff like this. We now know that he had autism spectrum disorder. And that's been corroborated. It's called retrospective diagnosis. You must do it with compassionate care, but that's been corroborated by at least 3 doctors in the UK. Okay, And in autism spectrum disorder, you don't ask emotional experience questions. You don't ask people how they feel or what they like. You just come up with systems. Right? I read somewhere that 25% of engineering professors in universities are probably autistic, because you have to be really strong systems thinker. And so what's very interesting, though, is when you do eye tracking, you can see immediately how, just like with PTSD, they don't take in stimuli neurotypically. So on the left is a neurotypical person looking at a cat. Subliminally, without conscious control, they will focus exclusively on the eyes and the front part of the face. On the right is someone in the autism spectrum. They avoid looking at the eyes. In autism, there's often hyperplasticity. There's too much connection in their brain, and it gives them too much stimulus. They can't handle it. Okay. So his architecture reflects his ASD. It's a direct expression of his brain disorder. And what's really fascinating is when you can really see this when you ask someone, when you have someone autistic look at the building, the library building I showed you earlier, whereas neurotypical, of 30 neurotypical people their brain refused to let them look at the blank facade. The one person on the autism spectrum, his brain made him look directly at the blank facade. Basically, different way that the brains work. So when you understand that, just like Gropius's PTSD, Corbu's autism is in architecture. And here's why it has to be this way. Because humans don't see reality. Reality is a construct between your eye and your brain, okay? Just like my cat doesn't have red photoreceptors. So my cat, even if I give it a red bowl of water, will see the water in the bowl as gray, because reality is a construct between what's in your retina and the external stimuli. So how did modern architecture happen? Relationally compromised people with atypical fixations, PTSD, and autism, and emotional regulation came up with an approach abetted by a wounded world rushing to bury the past, and an economic power structure that wanted to profit from it. I think one thing that you have to remember, and I really see this in my family's life, that people did not want to talk about World War I, and they never talked about World War II. And it was really amazing. A lot of people, especially in the United States, maybe all over the world, it was about burying the past and not looking at it. I think that's why the UK government decided this painting of World War I should go all over the United States so people could see what happened in World War I. It's a survival strategy. You don't want to think about things that made you scared. On the other hand, if you don't look at them, you're going to repeat things. You have to see what happened. Impact of World War I, architecture becomes avoided. You cannot understand. There are many things that led to modern architecture, but if you do not look at what trauma does to the brain, you cannot understand how it happened. And if you do not teach that Walter Gropius, Mies van der Rohe, and Richard Neutra, he was in the Austrian army, you could tell they had the brain disorder from the way they worked. It's false. And so that's what I now teach, and that's what I now write about. Okay, so because of our evolution, we need buildings to look like that, and that's why they work. These are all buildings in Greater Boston. Most of them are protected now with historic bylaws that protect them. You can't even take these down because people love them so much. All right. Our ancient brain architecture sets the parameters for our built architecture. Subliminal terror, creating the paradigm for post-World War I modern architecture. Evolution presets what we need to see. Just like evolution, I mean, nature's very consistent. She's preset our heart rate. She's preset our breath rate. She's preset our longevity. She's preset how we walk. She's preset how we're going to hold our head when we walk. It's all more or less preset. There are ranges, but it's essentially preset. It's how she works. Okay. So this is the end of my talk. Basically, the 21st century paradigm shift, just like the OECD says, is incredibly profound. Just like the 20th century was and the 19th century was. It allows us to completely forecast behavior. We can now predict before a building is built how people will behave around it. because their unconscious brain directs them. So this actually is in Cincinnati. I took these pictures a couple of years ago, and I ran it through the 3M visual attention software program that is used basically by advertisers and website designers. And what you can see is Zaha Hadid's building here. This is one of her first build structures, I think. It's designed as a public arts facility, is going to be ignored by the public because it doesn't provide the fixation points the brain needs to see, like the 19th century buildings do, or the early 20th century buildings do, that are right next to it and the slide above. So what the museum had to do, museums really run on public funding, right? They had to put MetroBot, that's the sculpture on the right, with streaming text at the front door about 10 years afterwards. So to give the building an identity, and so people would notice something was there when they passed. Because otherwise, when they're walking by or they're driving by, your brain's telling you nothing was there. The museum can't survive. So that's why MetroBot got installed in front of the museum. So we can also measure emotions incredibly clearly and quickly before anything's built. We can measure brainwaves, emotions, heart rate. We can measure it all. And it won't be that different because people are more or less the same. Okay. And we can reframe history. Modern architecture is a direct expression of the trauma of the World War I trench. I presented this at a medical conference, a trauma conference in 2019, and I presented it at the 2020 ANFA conference this year with a video. So this is exactly what happens in a paradigm shift. It reframes things. And we're in a paradigm shift, just like the OECD says, okay? So that really basically wraps up my talk. You've been fantastically good. When I do this, I sometimes get AIA learning units. And so we have to have learning objectives. The objectives were understand that unconscious processing directs behavior. See how biometric modeling, like eye tracking, can predict human behavior and the architectural experience before something's built. Learn how evolutionary history presets the human response. And how, whether we like it or not, we're hardwired to look for faces all the time. And we actually need to see them to regulate our own internal state. And then we're going to reframe architectural history, understanding the role atypical regulation had in modern architecture's creation. I can't hear you.
Thanks a lot, and that was really amazing. I'm sure we have a lot of questions. I'm gonna kick off. By the way, anybody who has any questions, just raise your hand or post anything here. I can unmute you, and then you can hop in and ask whatever question. I know that Mushira already asked one question, so Mushira, you're online, and then you can just unmute yourself. And
I'd love to see you. I'd love to see your faces.
Unfortunately,
you can't do that.
Just audio is fine.
Okay. And you want to see my face to see? Okay. And I would like to see where you're looking at through the screen. Thank you so much. This has been super insightful. I have a couple of questions. I don't know if the time allows, but the first one is something about, and well, excuse the background noise. So the first one is about like all these studies about where the human eyes don't to focus on a certain picture. Those are done in a certain environment, like in let's say, I don't know, in a setting where there's a screen in front of you, and then you're showed two pictures, and so you're not getting the full experience. I was wondering if there has been a comparative sort of study that examines like how we see, let's say, the same perspective while we are seeing it on a screen, and how this is also perceived while you're walking down the street.
Yeah, this is a really good question, and people have noticed this before. So as a result, they've dealt with it. And what you have now, and actually what a lot of retailers use to handle this, is eye tracking glasses. And so now you can get, if you'd like, from Toby, $20,000 glasses. You can see the big retailers call these $20,000 glasses, which they'll put on people, and they'll have them walk through a bookstore or have them walk through a store and figure out where they look. So you can actually use it in the real environment very easily. And basically the real environment studies corroborate the lab studies. The problem with the real environment studies, I just did one on November 5th, is we had people, it was so amazing. We had the $20,000 glasses, we had people walking down a street, and you know what happened? A fire truck came by with the amazing sirens. And so of course their heart rate, the way they look, everything's gonna change. So often to do the best lab studies, you really don't want to do it in the natural environment because it's too crazy. And in another place, we had them stop on a certain spot that was marked with chalk on a sidewalk. And suddenly, because it was 2 days after the American election, 9 policemen showed up wearing yellow jackets.
Okay.
So, but basically, these studies have been pretty well corroborated, and especially with 3M visual attention software that I definitely go to that site. Basically, they're doing 30 years of eye tracking study. And basically, we all have the same eye. Bottom-up processing in the human brain is pretty much similar, no matter who you are, what language you speak. Top-down can change based on your culture, your experience. It's a combination, but we're more predictable than you think. Otherwise, the car companies wouldn't be using this. Or otherwise, Apple wouldn't be buying the emotional expression software. So it can analyze how you're feeling before you know what it is.
Okay. Yeah, I was just wondering, like, it's not something to deconstruct the lab tests or the lab environment, let's say, but it was more about whether, now that we're talking about the space, so I was just wondering if making assumptions about a space are still valid just by...
Yeah, well, they are. Well, see, here's the thing about the brain that's a little crazy. I mean, what Freud says is actually right, and it's a little crazy. Another little crazy thing about the brain is, this is a quote from Nobel Prize winning neuroscientists, the Mosers. They're a married couple who won the Nobel Prize in like 2016 in neuroscience or something. It's like the brain is the most sophisticated surveillance system you'll ever find. So your brain is always looking for things that you don't even know. Just like the way your eye's moving 45 times in 15 seconds in that first videos I showed you. Most people don't realize their eyes are doing that. If they did, you'd be overwhelmed. It's too much data. So the brain is editing out stuff, but it's still doing it. So actually, I'm beginning to see, especially after that experience with the fire truck, that actually it's really good to do lab studies, because then you can, the human experience is incredibly complicated. 11 million bits are going to your brain every second. So you really need to be able to tease it apart, to deconstruct it. But we're much more similar than we realize. Otherwise, Walt Disney World or Walt Disney Paris wouldn't be the most visited tourist site in Europe as of 2016. What did Walt Disney do? He wasn't a neuroscientist, but what he did is he did evidence-based design. He sent his Imagineer designers to all the parks in the world, and they copied what worked best by observing how people were behaving. So they recreated Disneyland Main Street in Paris, and they also recreated it in California and in Florida. And in Disneyland is also the most visited tourist site in the United States. This was before COVID, of course. So how could they do that? It makes no sense, because they understand how the human brain works. And we're much more predictable than you think.
Okay. Maybe you want to jump in?
Hi, Anne, how are you? Thank you so much. This is so exciting.
I'm sorry, 1 second.
Yes.
Anne, can you just stop sharing the screen? Stop sharing the presentation.
Oh, yeah. Much better. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So, Anne, my question is the following. In the building that you said that you kind of like Photoshop and you close the windows and now it's white. My question is regarding to autistic people. Like you said, but I don't know if I got it wrong, but it's like they feel that it's too much connections and things that the brain have to work, and they cannot handle it very well. But also I wanted to find out is then if they go and look to the white, kind of like place where you place the window, if that relaxes them, like what is the feeling? Like, have you been able to also kind of like...
Yeah, that's actually quite fascinating. That's very, very interesting. I think that's really interesting. I think they regulate differently. So a neurotypical brain needs to see a face to feel soothed. The normal state of people outside, because of evolution, because we are all from the African savannah, is one of vigilance. The normal state of the brain is vigilance when you're outside. And so when you put a friendly face in front of you, or you provide the fixations, or then the brain can feel more regulated and at peace and not scared. And it can be subliminal feel too. You don't think you're scared, but your brain is feeling scared. So I think what happens is with PTSD and with autism, the regulation is reversed.
Okay. Yeah, because
Exactly
I know
what you're saying.
Yeah, like for us, like regularly, like if we're in a white room, all white, and we stay there for longer, like 24 hours, 48 hours, we start feeling very uncomfortable. But,
right. It's very, very interesting.
But I was wondering because I'm going to start designing residents, and they have their two daughters actually are autistic. One is more normal, but one has a more severe case. So now this is if it's related with the relaxing part of it, maybe. So that was my
right. I mean, I think this is beyond my area of expertise, because also with autism, there is someone with autism in my family as well. And at the same time with autism, you also want them to behave more neurotypically. You want them to learn to engage, right?
Right.
Right. And so you want them to be able to have a successful adult life. And so there also is ways to, work with autistic people so they can be more comfortable in society. But it is definitely something that could be definitely very, very interesting question. And it's quite interesting what you're saying.
Well, thank you. I'm going to keep following you. I'm really fascinated by all of this. Thank you so much.
Well, please stay in touch. And Genetics of Design is also a blog post about this. Mm-hmm. And definitely contact our nonprofit, thehappy.org.
Okay. Thank you.
So Hela, maybe if you want, you can try to activate your cam as well. I think now it's working.
Yeah, I thought Brian wanted to go next, and I could go after him.
Oh well, however you want. Brian?
Great. Hi. Thank you, Hela. And Chiras, I'm trying to turn my video on, but I also am unable to do so. But I am here and actively trying. Thank you so much for a fantastic talk. It was so insightful. I really enjoyed that, Ann Sussman. Thank you. So a question I have is around looking into the future. If we were to create a city, for example, where we really optimized our preferences using these kind of our subliminal understanding and these assessment tools, what would our interactions look like with the city itself and with each other in that? If you can surmise, what would your opinion be?
Well, I think in a way you want to design for human health, right? And you want to design for walkability. What's really fascinating is to learn what a Harvard evolutionary biologist now teaches, that the male body evolved to walk 12 miles a day, the female 9. And so you want to it turns out walkability is driven by hidden fixations. Walking is, you want to be able to do it with automaticity. That means without having to think about it. And so when I walk in old streets of Paris, or I walk in old streets of Siena in Italy, I can do that really easily, even if I don't speak Italian. In fact, that's one reason I started to do this research. It didn't make any sense. How can me, an American, feel more at home there? Makes no sense. It makes perfect sense, because the buildings and the narrative coherence and the face-like facades and the detail are giving me the fixations that are soothing my brain to make me feel like I'm safe there. Whereas the blank facades work for people with PTSD and autism, do not work for the neurotypical population, and never will. So basically, you have to bring back the urbanism we had in the past. I think one of the other toxic things we've done in America is embraced car centrism. Many people have written about this. There was recently an article that more people have been killed by cars in the United States than in all the wars we've ever been in. And also, cars don't allow you to walk enough. So unfortunately, architects are trained to design for cars. And we need to change that. We shouldn't be in cars. We should be walking. And with walking, you're meeting people, you go to a market, it's about interaction. I'm not sure I answered your question.
Oh, no, you did. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I have a couple more.
Suhaila, you want to go next?
Pass it off to Suhaila. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much, Brian. And thanks so much for us for also organizing this. And thanks so much, Anne, for the absolutely wonderful talk. And I think I had a question which was sort of, in extension to what Brian just asked. But what I'm really actually, I first want to make a comment, and I think it might be slightly outrageous, but I would like to, clarify this. So what we're really saying is that modern day architecture, unfortunately, has been built on the shoulders of 3 or 4 people who seem to be suffering from quite a few, kind of disorders. So one of them had PTSD, one of them had, like autism. And specifically, these are all like neurodevelopmental disorders, which seem to have to pose challenges on people in terms of attention and in terms of kind of like visual attention, auditory, like attention. So it's rather unsettling because, honestly, I'm from like India, and I see a reflection of this now here in my country, which, I come from India, and you've, of course, you did mention that you'd been to our Taj Mahal, which is so pretty. But if you see
I lived in India for a year, and then I lived in for about a year and a half.
That's amazing. So you know what Indian architecture, whether it's in like Rajasthan or in the south of India, or in the west of India is. But if you look at modern architecture today in India, it is so incompatible with human well-being and life, because one,
it's
made out of glass.
Exactly. Listen, you need.
I'm living in a house. Yes, I'm living in a house today, unfortunately, which is made out of like glass walls in Delhi, which means my house is going to get super warm in the summers. Bricks gone out of fashion. We use a lot of wood, which is again not compatible with very hot climate. So I think cities are being built in such incompatible manners, not just visually. Or, of course, India doesn't have like a cycling or a walking culture, which is, again, really unfortunate. But even visually, or even in terms of, just the whole like environmentally compatible, the like environmental compatibility component, I don't see architecture coming up at all like that. And I'm constantly struggling with
Suhaila,
in India specifically.
We're going to change it. Definitely, this is a huge topic, but I think we can do leadership. We can do sustainable design that fits nature and fits human nature, and also respects India's amazing architecture of the past, which is quite
absolutely. I mean, thank you so much for saying that, because it's completely going out of fashion,
right.
Which is so unfortunate. You see houses coming up which make no sense, and
they make no sense, and we need to tell it, and women need to lead it. So contact me. Let's do it.
Absolutely, I would really be happy to put
everything.
That. Thank you so much.
Information on my websites.
Right, and luckily, I do have a neuroscience background, and you have the architecture background, so we can definitely
Let's do it. Contact me. Okay.
Absolutely, we'll do. Thanks so much, Anne, and thanks so much for us for also organizing.
Thank you. Actually, it's a very good mix, because I think half the audience are architects and the other half are neuroscientists. So I think it's like a perfect mix. Anne, I want to ask you a question. Like, you mentioned the happy several times, but can you tell us what is the happy?
Okay, so what we did is we were realizing, me and some people who are professors at other colleges and our architects as well, they realized we have an opportunity. It's called the Human Architecture and Planning Institute. We founded it as a nonprofit about how do we get the fact that we can now do evidence-based design, and we can now bridge neuroscience and architecture. How can we do that? And that's what we're trying to do. And our first client, or our first, one of our early partners is with Amsterdam University of Technical Sciences. And we did the mobile eye tracking study with them, showing how people behave implicitly differently without conscious control on an old street or a new city street. And in Amsterdam, they're very interested in this because they have, like many cities, a big housing shortage. So they need to build like 100,000 units in 10 years or something. So how are they going to do this in a way that preserves what's best about Amsterdam? So that's it. But we're always willing to look for more people, to work with more people, to really bridge arts and sciences.
Yeah. That brings me to my next question with it, which is, obviously a lot of this work is interdisciplinary. and that
Excuse me, I couldn't hear
means
you.
it requires interaction. Sorry, no, I was saying that a lot of this work obviously is interdisciplinary, which means that it requires collaboration between people from design, architecture, and people from neuroscience and technology. And then I wanted to ask you, because you have experience in this, what do you think is the right skill set or educational background that should be implemented for such an interaction to happen?
Well, we've been very lucky. We're working with iMotions. iMotions, I mentioned, I showed you some of their work. They're based in Copenhagen and luckily in Boston. I couldn't be doing this if they weren't here. And so when we do a study, we work with their neuroscientists. They have PhD neuroscientists who work with us. So that's why we can combine architecture and neuroscience. And that's how we do it. But we also have worked with 3M VAS, visual attention software. Kelly Canavan at 3M has been very, very helpful, educating, and they have fantastic educational videos at 3M. Maybe I can put you in touch with some of them, which actually show how human vision works and how the basic aspects of human vision, the first 3 to 5 seconds, are the same internationally. It's very, very interesting to see how we see the world as a primate and how our eye presets and our evolution has preset how we're going to see for primate survival. So but it is something where we need more funding. We need to write new books. We need to get people not in science reading science. Often science is written so only scientists in a silo can understand it. You're smiling? And what's happened, you're smiling. What happens in a capitalistic society is the people that have the money, like the car companies and Apple, they take advantage of it because they can afford to hire the PhD neuroscientists, right? So we want to make the public realm, the people, architecture firms can't afford to hire these people, but they need to.
Yeah, definitely. We have some people here, such as Mercedes, who was more close to psychology and neuroscience. I mean, I'm really happy because it's something we're trying to do in neurotech design, which is to focus not only on neurotech per se, but how it can apply to a lot of other disciplines and then how to merge this together and bridge them. So yeah, I'm very happy about that.
What we can do with this talk is we're just starting to build a bridge. We're going to build a bridge. We're going to do it. And in a way, what's so interesting when you study architectural history, nobody said to Mies van der Rohe or Gropius, you're going to do it. They just did it. They just anointed themselves as the founders. So we're doing the same thing. We're the founders for a more holistic way of thinking, which combines the science that, quite frankly, wasn't around when they lived. The science simply wasn't there.
Exactly, and then actually that's one of the pillars at NeuroTech, because I mean it's all about having community and having a knowledge base, and then that will allow innovation. I mean that's the cycle here.
Right.
I'm really happy we had this conversation. Anybody from the audience has any other questions? I suppose everybody is so motivated. Brian is giving a +1,000 for motivation right now.
I see 73 chats. I haven't had time to look at them.
I've been trying to communicate most of them through my questions.
Okay, I haven't had time to read them.
Yeah, so I think nobody has extra questions. Actually, we slided more than the time we had. It was really a great presentation. This is Ann's book. Well, that's how I know Ann. That's how I got to know that Ann's work exists. You can definitely check it out. I have to say that this conversation was streaming on YouTube and it's gonna stay there. So be happy to just see it again or share it with people you think would like it. And thanks a lot, Ann, for giving us your time on Thanksgiving, and wish you have a good day.
Okay, you too. And I don't know if I can get the chats, but if I could find out, some people left me things on the chats and I don't know how to read them. So if
I'm gonna do my I can do my best to do that. I invite everybody who did something on the chat right now to put it in the meetup link.
Okay.
So we have the meetup event
because
on the
some people
chats
left
as
their
comments.
websites. Some people left their websites. I won't be able to get them. Yeah. Okay.
And LinkedIn's, yeah.
Let's talk again.
So yeah, so everybody, you can keep things in the meetup event. The page is going to stay up and the video is going to be on YouTube. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for us, Ann. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Ciao.